of the War and Peace Report. Coming up next, we'll be speaking with the Pulitzer Prize-winning writer Alice Walker. But now we're staying with John Paul Stevens, the Supreme Court Justice who's retiring. Who will replace him? Nan Aaron, our guest, president of Alliance for Justice. Glenn Greenwald, constitutional law attorney and blogger for Salon.com. Nan Aaron, go through the list of who you think will be chosen and who you think should be chosen.
Well, I think as we've all read over the past several days, there are three names that have been talked about the most. Those include our current Solicitor General, Elena Kagan, who is, people know, was the Dean of Harvard Law School for several years and worked in the Clinton Justice Department, and now she's our nation's Solicitor General. Merrick Garland, a judge on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, formerly a lawyer at the Justice Department, had some stints as being a prosecutor, and worked for a little bit at Arnold and Porter. He's a leading favorite for some of the conservatives, and even some ultra-conservative groups have spoken out in Merrick Garland's favor. The third name heard most frequently, Diane Woods, currently a judge from Chicago on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, was appointed by President Clinton during the 1990s and served with distinction on that court ever since that time. Before that, did some work at the Department of Justice in the Antitrust Division. Apart from those three names, there are several others that are mentioned. As you talked about earlier, Hillary Clinton has now been dismissed as a candidate. Harold Koh, legal advisor to the State Department. Pamela Karlan, a law professor at Stanford Law School, are two names mentioned. Yesterday, two other names were talked about. One is Sheldon Whitehouse, senator from Rhode Island, who sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and those individuals proposing his names believe that putting up a senator might avoid a bruising Senate battle, because Senate colleagues tend to favor their friends, people they've worked with in the Senate. And I guess the final name talked about is a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals from Montana, went to college, law school in Montana, Sid Thomas, again in his 50s, put on the federal bench by President Clinton and considered by lawyers, litigants, judges as a prominent, thoughtful judge. So there's I think, a very good list, and I may have not thought of some, but I think those are most of the names that we're hearing at the moment.
Nan Aaron, I want to thank you for being with us, president of the Alliance for Justice. Glenn Greenwald, I'd like you now to go through talking about how you evaluate some of these candidates. Your latest blog is called The Case Against Elena Kagan at Salon.com. Why?
I think the starting point has to be that the three nominees, likely nominees, identified correctly by Nan Aaron as the frontrunners, Elena Kagan, Judge Garland, and Judge Wood. Of the three, none of them would be more progressive than Judge Stevens. I don't think there's a single person anywhere who would suggest that that's the case. There are a couple of possibilities, like Harold Koh and Pamela Karlan, whom Nan also discussed, who very well may be as progressive as, if not more progressive than, Justice Stevens, but most people believe that they're not really viable choices. That the three frontrunners certainly are not more progressive than Judge Stevens, and I think it's very clear that two of them, Elena Kagan and Judge Garland, would actually be more conservative, perhaps much more conservative, than Justice Stevens would be. So what we're talking about, if either of those two individuals are chosen, Elena Kagan, the current Solicitor General, or Judge Garland, what you're really talking about is the effect of moving the Supreme Court to the right. Remember, this is a Supreme Court that's already dominated by conservatives. You have Justices Scalia, Thomas, Roberts, and Alito forming a basically impenetrable right-wing bloc, with Justice Kennedy, who was a Reagan appointee, frequently joining them
We're talking to Glenn Greenwald, but we are talking by video stream, so sometimes it just gets caught up for a second. Glenn, keep going.
So we're talking about the very real possibility here that President Obama, a Democratic president who progressives work very hard to elect with a Senate of 59 Democrats, could actually move the court to the right. And what I've been focusing on is the record of Elena Kagan, because it's well known that Judge Garland is clearly a moderate to conservative justice, and he has a long record of judicial opinions that people can go and read and see where he falls on the spectrum. Elena Kagan actually has very little record to speak of that would enable anybody to know where it is that she falls on the political spectrum. And I think that issue, the fact that she has so little record, is disturbing in and of itself. I mean, why would progressives or Democrats, with an opportunity to replace somebody like Justice Stevens, possibly want to take a huge risk of appointing somebody to the court whose judicial philosophy can't really be discerned because she's spoken out almost never on most of the key constitutional and legal questions of the day? And that even includes over the last decade, when there was an assault on the Constitution and the rule of law by the George Bush administration, and virtually every law professor, academician, anyone of note in the legal community spoke out against what it was that Bush and Cheney were doing. She was completely silent. You can't find a single utterance from her in writing or orally where she expressed a view one way or the other on the radical executive power claims of the Bush administration. And what little there is to see comes from her confirmation hearing as Solicitor General and a law review article she wrote in 2001 in which she expressed very robust defenses of executive power, including the power of the president to indefinitely detain anybody around the world as an enemy combatant, based on the Bush-Cheney theory that the entire world is a battlefield and the U.S. is waging a worldwide war. So I think there are a lot of reasons to be extremely worried about the prospect of the nomination of Elena Kagan, and the fact that she has very little record is by itself disturbing, and the little record that she has is even more so.
Why do you think she has moved to the forefront? There's been a big discussion about the fact that she has so much bipartisan support, Glenn.
Well, we know that this administration loves the idea of pleasing conservatives, and anybody who is pleasing to conservatives is somebody who is much more attractive as a political appointee than somebody who is perceived as liked by the left. I mean, one of the very few important nominees that President Obama made to an important position, Don Johnson, was somebody who was liked by the left, was someone whose nomination was left to linger for 14 months and just abandoned. She was the nominee that had the important office of OLC. So Elena Kagan is perceived as someone who is very good at accommodating right-wing perspectives. She did when she was the dean of Harvard Law School, and at her confirmation hearing for Solicitor General, Republicans couldn't praise her lavishly enough. I mean, she had a colloquy with Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator from South Carolina, where they were in complete agreement on virtually every issue involving terrorism and executive power. And even the furthest right-wing polemicists like Bill Kristol and Ed Whelan, who currently writes for National Review and was a lawyer in Bush's Office of Legal Counsel, have praised her quite emphatically as someone whose views on national security and terrorism and civil liberties they find quite palatable. On top of that, she is a steadfast Obama loyalist. She spent the last 14 months defending his administration and the positions that his administration has taken in the Supreme Court. She's somebody who clearly likes executive power, which if you're Barack Obama, who's asserted broad theories of executive power, will be attractive on the court. And simply politically, it's easier to get confirmed someone who's perceived as being and who is a moderate or even a conservative than it is to get someone confirmed who is a liberal. And for those reasons, I think that nominee might be very appealing politically and substantively to the Obama White House.
A blog about the death of Don Johnson's nomination and the significance of her withdrawing from being a nominee to head the Office of Legal Counsel. Why is this such a significant position, and why